Welcome to our discussion on consciousness. I know many of you are looking forward to learning about sleep, dreams, psychotropic medication, etc. This PowerPoint is designed to help clarify your textbook readings and aid you in completion of assignments and prepare you for the assessment. This week I'm going to end with enduring issues instead of starting with them. Let's start by defining consciousness. For the record, this is our textbook's definition of consciousness. There are arguments around whether consciousness exists, what its definition is. For the purpose of this class, we embrace the existence of consciousness and we define it as awareness of various cognitive processes such as sleeping, dreaming, concentrating, and making decisions. Awareness of various cognitive processes, sleeping, dreaming, concentrating, and making decisions. But how can one be conscious of sleep? Our textbook differentiates between waking consciousness and altered states of consciousness. As you see on your screen, waking consciousness is thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that occur when we are awake and reasonably alert. So we're concentrating, making decisions, planning, solving problems, remembering. It's you sitting in math class remembering what 3 times 3 is. A note about waking consciousness is, as your textbook states, the hallmark of normal waking consciousness is the highly selective nature of attention. I might be focused on what is 3 times 3, and that's 9 if you don't remember, and I may miss the teacher's directions. Does that mean that I was asleep during that? Was I in an altered state of consciousness? I mean, I may have been. I may have been detached from the reality. I may have been daydreaming. But when in fact I was just attending to the math problem instead of the teacher's directions. We talked about attention when we talked about sensation and the absolute threshold. Please remember that from chapter 3. We also discussed in chapter 3 the role of attention and observers' characteristics in perception. So, waking consciousness are the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, but they are dependent on what we're attending to. Consciousness builds off of perception, which is, of course, the interpretation of that raw data, but then memory builds off of consciousness. And then the cognitive processes are all intertwined in that, intertwined. Then we have altered states of consciousness. And this is defined, as you see, as mental states that differ noticeably from normal waking consciousness. This could be, it's just being detached, more detached from the external world. You could experience an altered state thanks to sleep, thanks to meditation, as the female on your screen, or thanks to a stimulant. Interestingly enough, some of these processes, like consumption of a stimulant, they're initiated by us so that we can change our state of consciousness. I'm drinking a cup of coffee right now. Now it's decaf, but I also had some Nutella with it, which if you knew me personally, you would know that that's my favorite. And it serves as a pick-me-up this afternoon. So as I record this, that I'm attentive, because I want that altered state. I want to become more attentive, more in tune to what I'm doing. We will spend most of our time talking about the altered states of consciousness, and the whole reason why is because the other chapters in the book, like chapter 3, cover that waking consciousness. They cover perception and cognitive processes and memories. And again, there is a class that Central Penn offers on the whole semester. You talk about states of consciousness, which might be helpful. We're going to jump right into sleep. That is an altered state of consciousness that we're going to discuss, and one that I know you're anxious to hear about. I often am upset by the number of hours that I spend sleeping. I have such better things that I want to do. I'd rather be doing something quote unquote productive. However, having a sleepover when I was younger or working overnight have taught me that I need sleep to be productive the next day. But do I need it? Like I need food and water? Our textbook says yes. Why? Food and water, I know what I need, why I need it biologically. Why do I need sleep? No one quite knows for sure, but as you can see on your screen, the evidence exists that sleep is necessary for physical and mental restoration. What are the benefits though? And that's what's listed below. Immune system functioning is improved. It boosts the immune system's response. I know if I'm tired and I know if I'm stressed that I'm more likely to get a cold. When we talk about stress and health psychology, the very last unit, we're going to talk about that when you are under stress and you're under sleep deprivation, your immune system doesn't function as well as it could. Also, it's interesting because sleep serves to cleanse the body of chemicals released when cells use energy. And there's a certain chemical especially that is sought after to clean up. And it builds up during the day and then it signals to the brain. It says, hey, it's time to go to sleep. There's too much of me floating around. You need to go to sleep so the body can purify itself. Interestingly enough, the caffeine that I'm getting right now through the chocolate that I'm consuming is temporarily blocking these receptors in the brain to allow me to delay the inevitable, which is to rest. Sleep, unlike coffee, it will enhance my creativity. It's going to enhance my decision making and problem solving. It is better to sleep on it. Have you ever heard we need to take a break and sleep on it? We'll be more refreshed in the morning. I feel as if many working adults and many college students miss that advice. And I mean, I've been there a couple times myself of pulling late nights to get everything done, quote unquote. And when in fact, I hate to delay something until the morning because more than likely I've delayed it long enough. If I were to delay it, I would do better in the morning with it. For those of you pulling all-nighters, the research says that with a good night's sleep, you are going to do better the next day. Sleep is also instrumental to the formation of long-term memory. And they say, if you remember from chapter 2, neuroplasticity is based off of an experience. We develop these neural pathways in our brain. We talked about it on the discussion board. So we have these neural pathways that develop due to experience. Well, sleep serves to, they say, enhance these neuroplasticity and increase the formation of new neural development or networks, saying that long-term memory is affected by sleep. Okay. Your book has a lot more research to back up what I just said, but it proves to me that I need to go to sleep tonight. It proves that sleep is necessary. But how in the world does sleep work? How does my body know at 10 o'clock to start yawning? Your body has amazing mechanisms for your sleep and its cycle. We already learned that there's chemicals in your body that signal the body when it's time to go to sleep. We also know from chapter 2 that the pineal gland and melatonin are also involved in regulation of your cycles. Yet, how does this work? The circadian rhythms are synced with the 24-hour solar system cycle of light and dark. It's evident in a lot of organisms, not just humans. The suprachiasmatic, I hope I said that correctly, suprachiasmatic nucleus, otherwise known as the SCN, is located just above the optic chiasm. And if you remember that, that is from chapter 2 when we talked, or chapter 3 when we talked about the cross of the optic nerves from the left and the right eye, and it forms this optic chiasm. And so anyway, the SCN is located just above this crossover of the optic nerves in this lower region of the hypothalamus, and it's responsible, the SCN is responsible for your biological clocks. What happens is it receives information. Where it's located is very important because it receives information about light and dark. And why else would it be located than near the optic nerves crossing? In response, the SCN sends messages. Remember, that's what neurons do. And this is a cluster of neurons. Sends messages throughout your body to say, all right, we need to change temperature, metabolism, etc. Your hormone of epinephrine, that's the one that sends your body on alert. peaks late morning, and then it declines the rest of the day. And then melatonin surges at night to send you to sleep. So the SCN is responsible for this whole process. It receives the input from the retina about the lights and dark, and then it sends these messages to get the hormones coursing through your body to wake you up, or to get the hormones coursing through your body to put you to sleep. This should tell you, if you're finding yourself sleepy in the morning and awake at night, that your biological clock is off, or it's that you trained your body to ignore your biological clock. Even newborns and young infants who are awake all hours of the night, they tend, when they start to sleep through the night, it tends to be from 12 at night to 5 in the morning. We are going to talk about good sleep patterns, and hopefully there's a thing or two that you can apply. It's interesting. I love this quote in your book, and I love the discussion that's had around jet lag and working at night. The quote says, "We rarely notice, we rarely notice circadian rhythms until they are disturbed. Jet Okay, so we now know that we need sleep, that sleep is guarded by the biological clock, which involves the light and the dark. It's controlled by the SCN, and there's neurons firing messages, hormones responding, etc. But, all right, so what is the process of sleep? Why do I dream at times and not other? What is this whole thing called REM? I'm not going to have a PowerPoint slide about the twilight state. It's described in your book. It's basically that resting sensation that you get after you've had a big meal. You know, after you've had Thanksgiving, it's not just the hormone or the chemical that's in the turkey. It's the fact that everybody's just kind of, they're full, they're sleepy, they're relaxing, but they're not asleep. Once you get through the twilight stage, you then go through the stages that we're going to go through. Non-REM sleep are these stages, and there's no rapid eye movement, and you alter with REM stages, and we'll get into that next. Stage 1 is this light sleep. Your pulse starts to slow down, your muscles start to relax, there's the rolling movements of the eyes. It's very brief, and one can be awakened during this time. You know, like the first couple minutes you're trying to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden you hear maybe maybe you're sleeping with someone, maybe you're on a family vacation and you bunk up with your brother or sister, and all they do is toss and turn, so you can't go to sleep because you're in that first stage and you're easily awakened. Stages 2 and 3, you can tell that someone's in stages 2 and 3 by the presence of sleep spindles in stage 2, which are these bursts, as you can see on your screen, of brainwave activity. And then stage 3, there's these delta waves, and they're the slowest, but they're the largest waves. The sleeper isn't easily aroused during these stages, nor are you very responsive to light or noise. Then you go into stage 4, and this is your delta waves, very slow. You've got the lowest heart wave. Your delta sleep occurs in 15 to 20-minute segments, and you tend to then have lighter sleep in between, and you have less delta sleep as you age. This whole process is very short. Spend a couple minutes in stage one, you've got 15 to 20 minutes of delta sleep, and then going from stage one, you go back to, or stage four, you go back to stage one, and that's about a 40-minute process. You work backward. And then once you're in stage one again, the muscles are more relaxed and the person is very hard to awaken. And then you see the eyes, these rapid eye movements. And you go into REM. It's characterized by rapid eye movements and increased dreaming. They call it paradoxical sleep, which means like inconsistent or an oxymoron, because most of your physiological measurements, like if somebody was to look at your brain activity, your blood pressure, your heart rate, it's like you are awake. Your consciousness, it's like if I were to take measurements of your heart rate while you're awake. But I can't wake you up. You're deeply asleep. You're not able to move, so to speak. You're paralyzed. And we go into REM sleep several times a night. We normally have 4 to 5 sleep cycles. The whole sequence from stage 1 REM to stage 4, back to stage 1 REM is about 90 minutes. And I don't know about you, but I sleep longer than 90 minutes, so I have several of those cycles a night. And I end up having REM sleep about 20 to 25% of the total sleep. The next slide just depicts, and you can pause it if you want to study it or look in your book, what's it like, how different age groups experience REM for how long, etc. Sleep patterns vary. They change from childhood to young adulthood to old age. Doesn't mean we need less sleep as young adults or as middle-aged adults, whatever you fall into. But they do show, you can see that children tend to have, they sleep a lot longer, but it would appear that we have REM. Once you hit a certain age, children tend to end up with that 20 to 25% of REM, just like young adults. As you age, you end up with less delta waves and less REM at times. You can see how REM spikes. It's interesting because the book manufacturer specifies the amount of REM sleep people need declines sharply during the first years of life. Newborns spend about 8 hours in REM, which is half their sleeping time, whereas older children, you can see that stooped down, older children spend 1 to 2 hours, or about 20 to 25%. And then as you age, you sleep less and less. And older people complain about that they don't feel rested. And it could be because of that delta sleep is reduced, as well as less REM. What's it like when you don't feel rested? What's it like when you feel sleep deprived? Between 1/3 and half of all adults regularly fail to get enough sleep. That's an issue. We're going to talk about why. Nearly 80% of adolescents fail to get the recommended 9 hours of sleep for their age group. Most adolescents I've worked with, their school day starts at 7:20. Their homeroom bell rings and they have to be there. I don't even know if they call it homeroom anymore, but they have to be to their first class or to where they hear announcements at. So if they have to be at a school, let's just say by 7, they have to be in bed no later than 10. How many adolescents do you know that are going to bed around 10? I'm going to guess most of you would say very few. It leads to cognitive deficits and physical problems. I wonder who does not believe me when I say that. What your book says, and it's based off of the research is listed, your reaction time slows, your memory is impaired, your logical thinking is impaired, your productivity decreases, and your errors increase. Automobile accidents increase. There's an estimated 20,000 auto accidents due to driving while sleeping, while drowsy. And that's just as dangerous as driving drunk, according to one of the researchers. I know that's a passion for someone in this class, educating others on the dangers of driving drunk. And for some, educating, there's a communication major at Penn who has made it part of her life's work to educate people on the dangers of driving while texting. But how often do you hear about driving without adequate sleep? And we're talking about it being just as dangerous as drunk driving. On the job, errors in judgment increase. And I was fascinated as I read this chapter that they talked about 3 Mile Island. If you're familiar with central Pennsylvania and Lancaster County, you should be familiar with 3 Mile Island. And they talk about a nuclear disaster that happened due to a fairly mild mistake that was made, and how second and third shift workers don't perform as well because of being rested, not as well rested. What about physical problems? Risk for heart disease, asthma, strokes, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of the risks for those health conditions increase. What about for you as students? I know a lot of you are juggling, and I don't envy your position, full-time work, full-time parent, full-time school, and you're only supposed to have one, maybe two full-time titles, not three, four, five. Trying to get time with your significant other, with your friends, with your kids, with your parents, and you are running on empty. What does that do? Well, it diminishes your attention. It leads to lower test scores and reduced arousal if you're robbing from sleep in order to get your work done. You cannot adapt to sleep loss. That's a myth. You can't sleep on the weekends to make up for sleep loss during the week. Research is changing about job requirements and what employers should do, not just to take care of their employees, because not all employers think like that, but it's also to maximize production. What should you do to improve your life functioning around sleep? Do the test on page 125 about your sleep patterns, and I'm going to offer extra credit, and I'll put that assignment on Blackboard. Apply what we know. In your book, on page 125, in addition to the test, there's all these strategies in order to make sure that you get enough sleep, and that's from a researcher that is listed there. One of the researchers says that taking short naps, about 20 to 60 minutes, can improve your alertness and reduce your irritability and improve your performance. I encourage you to use at least one of these tips this week and let me know how it works for you. Start that bedtime routine. I tell adults to do that all the time, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Go drink that warm milk. That's disgusting to me. I don't like warm milk. But it's not necessarily that warm milk has some kind of magical power. It's the fact that it signals, all right, it's time to go to sleep. There are teas and other things that help. We're going to talk about sleep disorders, and we're also going to talk about sleeping medication. At least 50 million Americans suffer from chronic long-term sleep disorders, and 20 million others experience occasional sleep problems. What are they suffering from? Sleep talking and sleepwalking. I don't think they need explained in detail what they are. Sleep talking is talking during your sleep. Sleepwalking is walking during your sleep. It usually occurs during stage 4, and it's much more common among children than adults, with about 20% of children at least experiencing one or the other. For the record, it can happen to adults. Your professor, I sleepwalk occasionally. I would say infrequently as opposed to occasionally. I talk in my sleep quite frequently. One wonders how I still have words at the end of the day. I'm not sure. I wish I'd talked less. We'll talk about my assumptions on why I sleep talk. The deal is it's more dangerous not to wake me up when I sleepwalk. It is. I know what the wives' tale says, but the research says to wake me up. One time my husband had to wake me up because I was looking for something and I started to head down the stairs. And when you're sleepwalking, if you've ever had that experience, you're not aware. I've sleptwalked with my eyes closed. It felt like, I was completely unaware that it happened. It's during stage 4, so it's incredibly hard to wake me up during that, or if somebody else sleepwalking. Take the time to do so just to keep them safe. What are some other sleep disorders? You ever had a nightmare? Your book says virtually everyone has had a nightmare, so I'm assuming that occasionally you have one. However, night terrors are completely different. Night terrors are frightening dreams that occur during non-REM. Nightmares occur during REM sleep, and they're remembering. But night terrors occur during non-REM sleep, and it's very difficult to awaken that child. Typically, it's a child, and they don't remember the context and the content of the night terror. You can't talk through them with the child like you would a nightmare. It's very frightening to parents. I've had parents tell me my child has had night terrors since they were a year old. I have some friends who have infants that are CJ's age, my son's age, who are already experiencing night terrors. And the individuals are hard to wake up. They push you away. They don't allow you to comfort them. It's interesting because it very much appears that the frequency of night terrors increase like nightmares do when someone's under stress. It's not indicative of psychological problems. We don't know completely why certain people experience night terrors. I often encourage parents, when it's coupled with other symptoms, to see a nephrologist, just to figure out if something's going on with the neurotransmitters and the neurological processes. But having a night terror alone does not indicate someone is crazy or suffers from mental illness. Some of the other sleep disorders are insomnia. It affects approximately 30% of adults worldwide. It's often stress related and it should be temporary. It can be caused by psychological problems or mental health concerns, interpersonal difficulties, or bad sleep patterns, like an inconsistent bedtimes. I have to say I never suffered from insomnia. My body, I normally listen to my body. I never pulled all-nighters before this past year. And I went to bed, and my body followed a cycle. And then when I had my son, it wasn't so much the pregnancy, it was getting up with him every 2 hours. And he is 13 months old, and my cycle has still not restored itself. There are times I can't go to sleep until 2 in the morning, because that was typically when he would finally be down for the night. And for me, the reason that the insomnia has persisted, and it's not every night, it's on occasion, is because I don't have a good night pattern, like a bedtime pattern on those nights or for a couple nights before that happens. Pay attention if you have insomnia, if you have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, what's going on in your life, what factors are present. There's also sleep apnea, and this is breathing difficulties at night. Sometimes people stop breathing. A lot of times you can go to a sleep clinic, they'll watch you overnight, they'll diagnose you with sleep apnea, they'll hook you up to a machine. Your book has more information on page 127 about it. Narcolepsy is an interesting sleep disorder. It's fascinating because the person will suddenly nod off during the day and they lose their muscle tone and their expression. So it's not like if you go to church, you see someone nod off during the bishop's or the priest or the preacher's sermon. It's not that. It's the uncontrolled, it's sudden, it's inherited, it's a genetic disorder. They are finding some ways to treat it. I do want to talk about sleep aids. Your book talks about it. I think it's wise to bring up and focus on. People become dependent on sleeping pills. The commercials have to say it because it's true. It disrupts the normal sleep cycle and it decreases REM and deep stage sleep. So if I were to take a sleep aid for the insomnia that I'm suffering from on occasion, so let's say on that occasion I take that pill, I might actually rob myself of the sleep that I would achieve. And what I need to do is set in some behavioral strategies to go to bed earlier, to follow a bedtime routine. I'm not saying that everyone who takes sleeping pills is in the wrong at all. I think that's a personal decision. I just think it's wise to recognize that they often, it reduces sleep quality and it can be linked with fatigue and irritability during the day. And that's on page 127. That's just not a personal opinion I pulled out of my hat. when I have clients, and I have many clients with the stats that I just gave you, obviously I would have clients that suffer from sleep disorders, insomnia in particular. I encourage them to talk with their primary care physician about melatonin, which is that term should be familiar to you. Um, it's it's a hormone that's released, or it's a chemical, I should say, that's released by the body to signal and to address sleep cycles. So I encourage them to talk to their doctor about starting melatonin, which you can buy at GNC. So if you're struggling with insomnia, I would encourage you to have that discussion with your physician. We are going to progress into the world of dreams. That doesn't mean that you can start daydreaming. Stay tuned. There's much associated with dreams. People talk about symbols in dreams. If you dreamt about a cow, that means X, Y, or Z. People talk about dreams, helping to predict the future, about being messages from God. We need to break it down, not just what dreams are, but also the theories behind it. For this class, dreams are, and don't jump ahead, I know that the animation came up. Dreams are vivid visual and auditory experiences. They typically occur during REM, not that they can't happen at other times. An average person has 4 to 5 dreams a night. Again, you have 4 to 5 sleep cycles, so 4 to 5 dreams a night. They typically last as long as the events would in real life. So if I'm driving to the store, let me give a better example. Sorry, I'm drawing short of an example. If I'm dreaming about ice skating, I don't know why I would dream about ice skating, but if I'm dreaming about ice skating, I may dream about going around the rink. It's not like it happens in a flash. It might feel like that because dreams are fuzzy, but the dream would last as long as it typically would take me to get around the rink. Internal and external cues. So an internal cue would be hunger or having to go to the bathroom, or an external cue like a train whistle. They can influence dream content. If awakened during REM sleep, you can remember most of your dream, like 80 to 85% per your textbook. So for your dream diary, have someone wake you up a bit earlier than you would if you're on a schedule. If you normally get up at 6, 5:30, keep a pen and paper handy, so that way you can write down those details. And there's more details on the dream diary information. But what's the whole purpose of dreams? Why do we have them? They're so bizarre. If you've ever awakened from a bizarre dream, you might think, why can't I just sleep? Why can't it just be restful? Dr. Freud, that's the bubble up on the screen. He said that dreams are unconscious wishes. Okay, when we study him, you're going to find that he believed that people mostly operate like an iceberg. There's a little bit on the surface, but 90% is below the surface in what he called the unconscious. And he had several different interventions for how to work through what was in the unconscious, because he believed that we weren't super aware of our own unconscious and the content. So he believed that dreams helps him and analysis discover the unknown meaning and drives. He was the first modern researcher on dreams, and he called them the royal road to the unconscious, believing that dreams represented sorry, unfulfilled wishes. There's the manifest content, which is the superficial, like the actual dream and its events. And then the latent content, he said, was the unconscious thoughts or desires, and a lot of times it was through symbols. He believed that the dreams gave you free rein to act as you wish without any moral controls. And as we study his theory on personality, this will make a little more sense. Yet, at times, we do have what he called a superego, or what we would maybe call our Jiminy Cricket or our conscience, that would step in even during the dream and say, whoa, too much, I can't let this go on. So whatever our immoral or our desire, whatever we would normally want, but our conscious normally says, you can't have that, it might get expressed as a symbol. Your book talks about wanting to kill your sister, and how your conscious in your dream might step in but then instead that desire is going to be symbolized otherwise. When you do your dream diary, you're going to record symbols and then you're going to look them up using the website provided. I want to hear your thoughts on that, and that's why I posted it, or I created the worksheet the way I did. If you like this theory, and we're going to talk about maybe some validity behind it in a few minutes, then I would encourage you to go see a psychoanalyst. They still do this today. There's also the dream and waking life is another perspective on dreams that argues that dreams are extension of our conscious concerns of daily life. It's altered, but it's not disguised. Research indicated that what people dream about is very similar to what you deal with on your day-to-day life. And it's interesting too, on page 129, it talks about gender roles and how men and women dream differently. Now, some of this research is changing, but I would encourage you to check that out. It's a rather interesting theory. Then we have dreams and information processing. In the later part of the 20th century, this whole other concept came forward, and it countered Freud. It said that, along with the information processing theory, that this view says information gathered during the day is reprocessed in dreams in a way to strengthen our memories or to integrate emotionally significant events with past experiences. It's like our timeout from page 129, and it allows us to sort through the day's events and erase whatever's not necessary and store whatever is. There's research about the theory, and it's on 129. The last theory I'm going to present is dreams and neural activity, and it says, and this is brand new research, that when using these brain imaging techniques we talked about in chapter 2, it's indicated that the limbic system, which remember is our emotional brain, is super active during our dreams. It's very, very involved. And then our forebrain, which is all involved with memory and attention and logic and self-monitoring, that's less involved. So it would account for why our dreams are so highly emotional, yet there's not a lot of logic, insight, or self-reflection. And this may say that Dr. Freud was on to something. You need to use one of these theories in your dream diary, so I would encourage you to read more in your text. It presents it a little more clearly. And then there's also a TED video for you to watch that presents other theories on dreams. Choose one of them and go through it in your worksheet. It's interesting, we talk about psychoactive drugs in this unit because it's an altered state of consciousness. It's one that we initiate ourselves, and it may seem odd, but hopefully as we go through you understand why it's in this. Psychoactive drugs are chemical substances that change your mood, your perception, your mental functioning, or your behavior. You see the tie-dye, maybe you think about marijuana, which if you've read your week 4 guide, you know that's part of our discussion board. Okay, so we think about that, but there's a lot of other psychoactive drugs, like coffee contains caffeine. That's a psychoactive drug. It affects our mood, our perception, our mental processes. I will clarify, we're not going to go through all drugs or all classes of drugs in this unit. We're just going to go through the ones that affect these areas. It's interesting, your book does an excellent job reviewing how the perception of drugs, the perspective on drugs, the uses of drugs have changed over the centuries. Have there always been alcoholics? It's possible. Is the rate of alcoholism a lot higher now? I would say probably. Are drugs stronger now? Absolutely. It's interesting because previously in other cultures and our own, drugs, this whole war on drugs didn't happen until the 1900s. I mean, some of the substances got introduced a little bit before that, or a while before that, but most addictions outside of alcohol and opiates, we'll talk about when that came about, it didn't start until the 1900s and even later in the 1900s, and it's been very expensive And the reason why is because now it's all about recreational use, where previously we didn't have medicine. So it was used for medicine. We didn't have the advances in medicine that we have now, I should clarify. It was used for nutritional benefits. It was used for culturally approved stimulants, like cocaine was used in Coca-Cola, if you ever wondered about that name. It was used in religious rituals, but now it's used recreationally. Alcohol used to be diluted with water, your textbook says, and drugs today are much stronger. We're going to talk about marijuana, and the marijuana of today, according to a seminar that I heard the results from a while ago, marijuana today is a lot stronger now than it was when I was in high school. There's a lot more people doing it now, in my opinion, too. As we know from Breaking Bad, there are also drugs that can be created. There are drugs that can be created like meth, thanks to Mr. White and Jesse and that old crew. So there's meth, there's Special K, etc. We're going to talk about it. These synthetic drugs are the scariest to me in some ways because I think the littlest is known about them. I could be wrong, but and it's not just from my viewing of Breaking Bad, but in my experience, it seems like because it's synthetic, that it can be easier to get a hold of, and because it's newer than some of the other drugs that have been around or substances that have been around, we might not be aware of the long-term full effects of their use. We know certain things about nicotine. Well, nicotine has been popular use for a long time, but if I use ecstasy every other weekend when I go to a rave, not saying that I do that, just using me as opposed to you, because I don't know you, as just a generic example. If I use ecstasy every other weekend, what does it do to me long term? Your book does go through how drug effects are studied, and if you want to learn more about that, you can. In addition to today, what's going on, there's stronger drugs, there's synthetic drugs, but we know more about certain drugs' effects. And the book goes through that. There's certain government agencies and private agencies that study this in detail. Is substance use always wrong? Is it bad for me to alter my waking consciousness with a glass of wine at supper tonight? I think it's important to differentiate between substance use, substance abuse, and substance dependence. And for clarity, there's a book with all the mental disorders in it. It's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it used to specify use, dependence, and abuse. It's not broken up that way now. The new book just came out in 2013, but I will still use these categories because I think they're wise. Substance use is the occasional use of a drug. Substance abuse is a pattern of abuse that results in diminished ability to fulfill responsibilities, repeated drug use in dangerous situations, so you're being risky, and you have legal difficulties related to drug use. We're talking about someone who's abusing alcohol. They have a hangover repeatedly, and so they're not able to function real well at work. Maybe they have had repeated alcohol, they use alcohol and they drive several times. And then they maybe have legal difficulties that stem from that. So they have DUIs or DWIs, or maybe they've hurt somebody's property in the process. But it's got to be related to the drinking, the alcohol, or whatever substance is being abused. Dependence is different. Think about abuse as what are the consequences of the use. Dependence is what happens to your body. And dependence means you're more tolerant of the substance, you go through withdrawal, and then there's other symptoms that are involved based on the substance. That's why it says specific symptoms. There's certain things about alcohol, opiates, whatnot. And it has to be for at least a year. Someone being dependent can look very different than someone abusing. Someone abusing could be a college student binge drinking on the weekends to relax with their fraternity, where someone dependent on it can't go through the day. And I'm going to try not to rely too much on personal stories, not personal, but based on my professional experience. I did have a man that I worked with that had abused alcohol, but he was also dependent on alcohol at one point where he would have to wake up in the morning and have a drink in order to shake off the jitters and be able to go throughout his day. That's not always true of every alcoholic, and I think that's the picture that we have in our mind, which means certain people don't know they have a problem because they aren't the guy or the girl that should be going to AA. They don't need a drink to function, but when in fact they do. So what classes of drugs are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, and marijuana. Marijuana is kind of on the outskirts of hallucinogens. And then I'm going to add in psychotropic meds. What happens with depressants? It slows down one's behavior or cognitive processes. Slows you down. Alcohol may seem like a stimulant, but it is not. It is a depressant. Opiates, barbiturate. It is involved in 20,000 deaths annually directly. And I taught this in Psychology of the Criminal, that it is responsible, alcohol is responsible for more violence and deaths than all other drugs put together. So if you think people think that heroin is the worst drug in the world. Someone's a heroin addict, they're just shameful. And I'm not saying that that's true, that's a stereotype that I've seen. But alcohol, which is legal, is responsible for more deaths than heroin, cocaine, barbiturates. I mean, who would have guessed that? But if you're aware of drunk driving accidents and the violence that occurs as people drink more, it's very clear that chronic use leads to violence. Yet, despite its dangers, alcohol is popular. Why? Because it calms the nervous system. It causes one to feel relaxed, or it elevates one's mood. It can make people feel more courageous, less inhibited, more spontaneous, or more entertaining. So then college students drink because that's what quote unquote happens on college campuses. Binge drinking is having more than, I think it's 4 drinks for women, 5 drinks for men. And frequent binge drinking is 3 or more times in a 2-week period, which means going to a party Friday, Saturday, the following Friday. Frequent binge drinkers have problems and more serious problems than other students, missing classes, engaging in unprotected sex, getting in trouble with campus police, engaging in vandalism, or violence because your inhibitions are lowered, getting hurt or injured. What are the costs of alcohol? It is the most popular. What is the cost? Health issues, potential harm to self or others. If you have children in the home, the impact on them. And then the actual effects of lower inhibitions. So effects on perception, motor processes, memory, and judgment. It's correlated with increases in aggression, hostility, violence, or abuse. So when you combine a man and a woman drinking, or let's just say 2 men, drinking together, your inhibitions are lowered, his violence or his tendency for violence is increased, and then his inhibitions are lowered, and a fight breaks out. Interestingly enough, women are more susceptible to the effects of alcohol than men. And it's not just a weight issue, because alcohol is processed by our body at different rates based on our weight. And we're going to see that on the next slide. I do want you to check that out, especially if you're a female, on page 135 and 136, about why women are more susceptible. Here are the behavioral effects of the blood alcohol content. They say on average, it takes, for 1 drink, it takes the liver an hour to process it. 1 drink is a 12-ounce beer, a 1-ounce shot, or a 4-ounce glass of wine. And if you're slighter in your frame, it might take your body longer. So if you're slamming more than that, then you have this level of blood alcohol in your blood. You have a level of alcohol in your blood because your body doesn't have time to process it. If you have a 0.05, you feel good, less alert, and reduced inhibition. 0.1, you can't drive. You're slower to react, less conscious. All the way to 0.6 is when you die. So can you imagine people slamming drinks during drinking games? Why drinking games are such a point of concern. Let's move on. I don't have a lot of time left. Barbiturates are downers. They're potentially deadly. The effects are very similar to that of alcohol. They're first used because they're sedatives, and sometimes they're prescribed. And for those that experience seizures, they're anticonvulsant properties. Now it's only used to treat epilepsy and arthritis. Sometimes prescribed as a sleep aid, but it disrupts that natural sleep pattern and again causes dependence. People use it because of the inhibitions being lowered and feeling more relaxed, but it's really scary and people will die when they combine it with alcohol. Opiates, and this is derived from the opium poppy, so this is opium, heroin, etc. It wasn't always abused. What happened was in China in the 17th century, when tobacco was banned, then people started to smoke opium, and then people got addicted. What happens? It dulls your senses, you feel euphoria, you feel well-being, you feel relaxed. And now they have synthetic drugs resembling these opium derivatives, and they're classified as opiates. You have morphine, which was used in medicine. It's still used in medicine. They used it during the Civil War in order to help, and then they would give it intravenously. And what it does is it resembles endorphins, which are the natural painkillers that our body produces. So they help you feel good mentally and physically. Some people don't love being on morphine. Some people don't. It's a different, if you're going through surgery or whatnot. Heroin is a lot of times there's a negative connotation around heroin. I can't stand that because I had a dear friend, not a dear friend, I would say a friend who passed away from a heroin overdose. He wasn't this movie stereotypical junkie looking guy. He was a nice guy, a guy that I was interested in at the time. And he wanted to have that euphoria. I didn't know that he was still using. I thought he had ceased from using, and there was no evidence that he was addicted to it. It was just that he used it once in a while at a party, and he passed away because he didn't know his limits, essentially. Not everyone that uses heroin is that junkie that you see on TV. You also have stimulants. Speaking of being hooked, which Nick was not to heroin, but I am to coffee. It's a stimulant. Caffeine, nicotine, ecstasy, cocaine. These are drugs that stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. If you remember what that is, that's a fight or flight. I'm going to get something done. When I drink coffee, I feel good, I feel happy, and my energy is. Let's talk about coffee a little bit more. It's part of this class of caffeine is part of these stimulants. It's found in coffee, tea, beverages, and non-prescription drugs. It can be generally considered benign in small doses. For those of you that consume it regularly, you know that you can become dependent and intolerant. I'm addicted to coffee and caffeine in general. I really do have to watch my intake because it bothers my mood and my sleep cycle. There's information in your book about why it doesn't necessarily impact your overall sleep cycle. It adds to my insomnia. Caffeine is the only one that does not seem to alter your sleep stages or cause REM rebounds, although it decreases the number of sleep minutes and the increased time it takes to go to sleep. Caffeine exaggerates at times some mental health conditions. I've seen this. And it can cause physical symptoms such as anxiety, headaches, heart palpitations if you've had too much. Your textbook details what happens for those dependent on it. You have somebody who drastically goes cold turkey off of coffee. They will often complain of headaches, of being grumpy and irritable. Nicotine, which by the way is one of the most addicting substances, it's similar. The neurochemical properties are similar to cocaine, amphetamines, and morphine. So you're talking about opiates. Plus, it's stimulating. It affects several different neurotransmitters. And depending on the time and amount smoked, it can be sedating or stimulating because it affects norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. And those are all involved in mood. They're involved in, again, your sedative or your stimulating. They're involved in the reward pathways. We talk about what can happen to teenagers, that smoking cigarettes is a warning sign and a risk factor for future use of other substances and depression. Amphetamines, during World War II, it was used to alleviate soldiers' fatigue. It was a pet pill, and then people started to use it like truck drivers and other vocations in order to stay awake. And what it does is it produces a rush of euphoria, but then it causes a crash. And I've known people to take cold medicine when they don't actually need the cold medicine, but they want the rush instead. I haven't necessarily known people to do meth or to do ecstasy, but more so that. There are short and there are long-term consequences of using methamphetamine. You can see page 140. Sometimes personality changes, sometimes homicidal and suicidal thoughts, aggressive behavior, and that's when there's chronic use. If you watch Breaking Bad and Jesse goes through about where he is using all the time, you see his paranoia. Consider it within the light of this lecture and the text, and you will see it in a different light. Cocaine, it's derived from the coca plant, produces euphoria, and it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system again, which is of all stimulants, and it leads to anxiety, depression, and cravings. And what happens is it damages this dopamine brain cells, and normally dopamine is reabsorbed. We talked about the synapse, and the dopamine goes across and is reabsorbed, and then you feel satisfied. It's like eating a good meal. You feel happy, you feel the euphoria. But cocaine blocks these messages, and so then you want more because you never feel satisfied and the dopamine releases and you have that euphoria. Addiction occurs because cocaine damages the brain cells that produce the dopamine, so you need more and more to produce the same high. In my substance abuse class that I took in grad school, the educator said that the best high you ever get off of cocaine is the very first time, and you're always chasing that high again. Dr. Freud tried cocaine because it was, they tried to say that it was a way to alleviate alcohol dependency, and he said, no, this is not a good idea, but it has research. Crack, which is the cheaper brand, so to speak, it reaches the brain in 10 seconds, and the high lasts 5 to 20 minutes, and then it ends with a depression. 10 seconds! That's crazy if you're having a bad day. Hallucinogens are any number of drugs that distort visual and auditory perception. And marijuana is in here, but I wouldn't say that it's a hardcore hallucinogen like LSD is. LSD has been on and off again abused by the culture. So it produces these hallucinations and delusions very similar to someone who's schizophrenic. And for some people, it's pleasurable. For other people, it's terrifying. If you've heard of a bad trip, that's when someone has a bad experience with LSD. It doesn't appear to produce dependency or withdrawal effects, but you can build your tolerance, and then it builds rather quickly, and so when you do it again, it doesn't produce such a strong distortion. And typically people take it, every once in a great while, as opposed to every day or every weekend or every party. I will say you have to be careful with marijuana because sometimes now they dust it with LSD. So it's been abused on and off by our culture, by other cultures. Can you imagine when we talked about sensation and perception? This alters it. And for some people, that might mean the most beautiful sunset ever. For other people, it can be seeing demons, and it it scares me as a psychologist or as someone in the mental health field because I know about the hallucinations and delusions that people experience with mental illness, and I don't know why somebody would want to copy that. I do have to say that plays into my feelings about marijuana because as a therapist, I've seen people with resulting irritability, anxiety, paranoia that can come from the high of marijuana. For most people, they feel euphoria, they feel this well-being, you're very happy or you're relaxed, excuse me. But for other people, it leads to some psychological issues, and in my opinion, it's a psychological drug. That's what I've always heard it classified as. Um, it affects your memory. I'm not gonna, because I don't want to communicate my beliefs about it. And I'm done too much of that already. I see both sides, and I want you to debate both sides in the discussion board. Read page 142 in your text. Read the good and the bad. Read the links that I put in the resource folder. Read the good and the bad. There are good effects to marijuana. There's a reason why it's used medicinally. Read them and let me know what you think. Should it be legal or not so much? This is a national survey that says that marijuana use is going down, and it is not true anymore. That's why I included this slide. This is not the case anymore. It is marijuana use is on the increase again. So if you look in your book, there's a summary page, and it's nice because it says what are the effects of marijuana, what happens when someone overdoses, and how can you tell that tolerance and dependence. It's on page 134 in your book. We have to talk about psychoactive or psychotropic medications, and because it affects one's consciousness. This is a summary table from chapter 13, and it goes through in chapter 13 in detail the psychotropic meds. It's interesting that medications are used to affect the biological processes we learned about in chapter 2. For instance, it's supposed that serotonin is linked with depression. So there are classes of drugs. You see the antidepressants and then the four different types that are designed around certain research assumptions. So the SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So that way your serotonin lingers a little bit longer, so you have an improved mood state. But then there's other ones that affect other structures and other neurotransmitters in your brain. There's a lot of neurotransmitters that are involved in depression. That's why you can't just prescribe one SSRI and assume that it'll be all better. Not everyone that takes Prozac feels better or Zoloft. It's interesting because you should see that there's barbiturates used as sedatives. I want you to check out chapter 13 if you want to know more about this. Not that I don't think that it belongs in this chapter. I just don't have the time to go through it as fully as I would like to. It certainly is a conversation to be had whether like there's medication for ADHD. You see it on there, psychostimulants. Amphetamines. Well, is that not what we just talked about when we talked about meth? Yeah. Some of these benzos, people use those incorrectly, but they're used for anti-anxiety. It's interesting that there are medications for those with mental illness that are allowed, but the general public should not have access to. And that's why pill parties are so popular anymore, because or taking Adderall from your buddy's stash because he doesn't take his ADHD meds anyway, and it helps you stay up all night. That's not good news. Just because it's a psychotropic medication and that it can be prescribed does not mean you should have it. For certain people, their brains they're wired, they function differently, and this helps. For someone else who that's not true of, the abuse of it is something that needs attention. I really wanted to go through this more, but I don't have the time to do so. Abuse and addiction varies person to person. Not everyone who has an alcoholic father or mother or aunt will end up abusing alcohol. There are biological factors. At least half of a person's susceptibility to it is linked to genetic factors. Not all of it, but about 50%. This is strongly established with alcohol. Heredity affects how many enzymes I need to break down the alcohol, the tolerance levels, the quantity of neurotransmitters in the brain, and the number of receptors to that. Then there are also psychological factors that say that it's going to make me feel better. I have certain cognitions around it. If I have behaviors that I associate with it, like say that I have a hard time getting a guy to talk to me unless I'm drinking. That when I go out, I'm quote unquote socially drinking because I know that if I socially drink, I'm so much more fun and that I can get a date. Now, for the record, I have a husband and I did not meet him while drinking. This isn't true of me, but for some people, they think that they need that alcohol to break the ice. And that's a psychological factor and it explains the abuse or the addiction at times. There are social factors, but it's not social as in what we just described. Excuse me, it's social as in what environment did I grow up in? What are the attitudes and the beliefs around drugs and alcohol? It plays a much more powerful role than genetics in determining when I start to drink, how long, whether I abuse. Genetics are more influential in determining who eventually abuses them, but when do I start to drink is highly dependent on when individuals in my environment did. Did I see moderation? Did I have an environment that communicated you wait until you're 21? Or was I given a beer bottle at 2, told to take a sip at 14 or 11, and told I wasn't a good representation of the family if I didn't chug a beer at 14? Cultural factors, it influences the degree to which people use drugs or alcohol. Alcohol plays an important role in certain rituals in certain cultures, where other cultures, I have Islamic friends who don't drink alcohol at all because it's not allowed in their religious beliefs. Meditation is covered in your book as well as hypnosis, excuse me, because it alters your state of consciousness. Meditation is any various method of concentrating, reflection, or focusing of thoughts undertaken to suppress the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. It is amazing to watch people engage in this. It's very useful for stress reduction and it might enhance your effectiveness of the immune system and overall psychological well-being. You're bringing your thoughts under control, you're focusing your thoughts and your cognitions, you're altering your waking consciousness to an alternative state. And then there are many descriptions of different types of meditation listed in your book. What it results in is lower rate of metabolism, reduced heart rate, lower rate of respiration, decreased blood lactate, and increased alpha brain waves, which indicates relaxed wakefulness. If you struggle to achieve Meditation. I have an amazing free MP3, um, and it is progressive muscle relaxation, and it's 8 minutes long. And the more and more you practice it, the more and more you'll find yourself engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. Hypnosis, there's a lot of controversy. I chose not to focus on it this term, and it's a trance-like state in which a person readily responds to suggestions. There's debate on what it means to be done, the degree of susceptibility, whether it should be used, whether it's effective or not, if someone's relaxed, how they're able to relax, etc. I'm not going to go through it. Read about it in your book if you're interested. This food, oh, I'm so sorry. I was mistaken. I forgot that I added the enduring issues at the end. I want you to go back through your book. You can see on page 145, it talks about how person and situation. If I'm given morphine in a hospital, the effects may not be as positive if I do heroin on the streets. Okay. Or if I'm given a depressant in the hospital, it might not work for me like alcohol works for me in a bar. How do the settings in which the altering drugs are taken, the setting in which I take it, how does it influence their effects? And that's all about when we talk about the cognitive social learning theory, it banks off of this quite a lot. Page 145 describes this. Diversity versus universality. Are there significant differences among people in their susceptibility to various altered states of consciousness? Are certain people more susceptible to the effects of, say, alcohol, insomnia, drinking coffee late at night? Another discussion around diversity and universality is on page 122, where it talks about individual differences in sleep. Do you imagine only needing 3 or 4 hours of sleep? That's the discussion on page 122. Finally is the mind-body issue, and this is key, oh my goodness, to this whole conversation, not only in the psychology discipline, but also in the philosophy discipline. Any conversation about consciousness, there's always the mind and the body. How does hypnosis or meditation change the body's response? How about the body's response to an antidepressant changing the psychological experience of emotion? This is all mind and body. In what ways do psychological states affect biological processes, and conversely, in what ways do biological processes affect psychological experiences? And I encourage you to consider that more. Now, on that note, I am done.